Hello and welcome to the We Need Water podcast. My name is Michael Brent with Cascade Water Alliance in King County, Washington. Cascade is a municipal water supplier providing drinking water to more than 380,000 residents. I'm glad you're here. Today we are fortunate to be speaking with a towering figure in the garden world, Michael Perry, aka Mr. Plant Geek. He's very well known in the UK and around Europe and elsewhere. And he's also a featured speaker at the Northwest Flower and Garden Festival in Seattle. He's been involved with gardening and plants since he was 5 years old and was listed in the Sunday Times as one of the top 20 most influential people in the gardening world. Very impressive. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thank you. What a lovely intro.
Well, I'm glad you're here today. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
It's always lovely when someone else introduces you because then you see it from their perspective. So, no, thank you very much.
All right. Well, let's get right into it. How did you come about your love of plants and the title Mr. Plant Geek?
Well, do you know what? On a very simple level, if I wasn't working with plants, I don't know what else I could do. So kind of like sometimes I'm like stuck with this because I'm not good at anything else. But anyway, when I was...
You found your little niche in life, and you're going to stick with it.
Yeah, but I'm happy here, so that's good. So yeah, when I was really young, I was gardening with my grandparents and with my parents, and I soon took over the garden. I was selling plants as well because I was quite a little entrepreneur as well. So I had a little mail order herb nursery. I got to the end of school, and all my spare time I was spending with plants, growing, learning about them, selling them as well, making money. And went to college for a couple of years after school, a horticultural course. And I wasn't a very confident kid, so I wasn't really planning ahead. And there certainly wasn't big opportunities for horticulture, as it were. So I really got to the end of college and wasn't sure what I could do. And I saw a competition at Thompson & Morgan, which is the biggest mail order plant company in the UK, and basically entered this competition to design a garden. And I didn't win a job, but afterwards I wrote in and asked for a job, and I was taken on as an apprentice, and I was with them for about 20 years, introducing new plants, the marketing, the imagery, all around it. So a lot of my experience is not really a down and dirty gardener, but it's really a plant marketeer, and a kind of like around the marketing of plants and kind of like developing new plants and rebranding plants we already know. And of course, that is something that then moves with the trends and different needs. And of course, that is some of the stuff we'll touch on today. So yeah, and I've now been freelance for about 8 years. And I really do, I really do whatever comes up is the best way to describe it, which could be TV, podcasts, speaking, presenting, hosting. I'm in Japan at the moment doing some workshops and demonstrations for an English garden school. So yeah, it's really varied. And really it all comes through social media being my portfolio and my visual CV. And that's kind of, having a lovely time.
Well, that sounds like you're living the dream there. That's just awesome.
Thank you.
And now talk to me a little bit about the title, Mr. Plant Geek.
So when I was young, I explained this shy little boy that was really seen as a geek. And I was always hiding my love of plants from my school friends because it wasn't a cool thing in those days. All has changed now. But when I then moved to freelance, I kind of like felt I needed maybe a kind of brand and something to be noticed by. And so Mr. Plant Geek just kind of popped into my head. And I remember checking like the website was available, the social media handles all at the same time, because, you've got to kind of approach it well. And I believe online with social media and website, you've got to be easy to find. And when someone finds you, they've got to understand what you're about as well. So you've really got to make it clear because it's a very busy world now. There's a lot of people trying to get your attention. So yeah, I was just then ready to go with Mr. Plant Geek. And it felt like a nice tribute to the fact that I used to be embarrassed about being a geek, but now I was really proud of it and happy that that was then my branding. So yeah, feels good.
Well, that's great. That too is a wonderful story. Has had obviously a very happy ending thus far. Now, this is a bit of a digression, but I'm just thinking as you're talking there, You're from the UK. You grew up in the UK. Where exactly?
Kind of in Suffolk, sort of, I think where Cambridge is, and a little bit to the east. So, actually, interestingly,
Okay.
one of the driest parts of the UK as well. So, mm,
Well, the reason I ask is the UK obviously has a real history with
mm,
gardening, correct?
mhm.
I mean, would it be correct to say that sort of modern gardening did it sort of evolve in that part of the world?
I guess, yeah, a lot of people would see Kent a bit lower down as kind of like the Garden of England, but I guess there's all pockets of, great large gardens and kind of like historical things in many parts of the country as well. So it really is, yeah, it's I think it's easy to forget the heritage that we have with this sort of thing because, I travel in a lot of different countries and then you see gardening in different ways, but never such a heritage in that way. So yeah, I feel really proud.
There's a group of islands off the coast of Washington
Mm,
called the San Juan Islands. And they have a really interesting history in and of themselves. But in the early days of colonization, uh, the British had troops there,
uh-huh.
and so their fortifications, their little
Yeah, yeah.
military, it's not really a base, but where they were stationed there, it's still there today. It's been preserved, and it's I believe a state park up there. It's really fun
Oh,
to learn
yeah.
about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
history. But I've always remembered from my first trip up there, the soldiers when they were there, which is a long time
Mm.
ago now, they made nice gardens. They made traditional English
Okay, yeah, yeah,
gardens,
yeah.
and they're still there today.
Uh-huh.
They're still cared
Oh,
for and
wow. Oh,
maintained
that's really
the
cool.
same way.
Uh-huh.
Well, talk to me about what's your primary area of focus with gardening?
Mm. So really, I would say it is new, different, and unusual plants. Because with my heritage at Thompson and Morgan, obviously introducing new plants, putting together the marketing, always being fascinated by something that is different. And not just strange plants. I've done a lot of work with strange plants. So Hortus Curious, my book is all about weird and wacky plants, but also things that are new to market. Like in Japan, like last week, I was very excited about a brand new blue cyclamen. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, So kind of always kind of with my finger on the pulse of what's happening in the markets. And over the years, I've really become almost like an industry influencer because I've got that connection with the industry, but I've also got access to the consumer. So I can get some of that real time feedback of what consumers are looking for and kind of how well the industry could launch a new plant. But sometimes it's not necessarily about new plants, but rediscovery as well, or rebranding. One of the best rebrands was really older cut flower varieties of lily that were rebranded as tree lilies for the garden. Big shrubs, back of the border, lovely long stems. That can be something for a consumer once it reaches the end of its commercial life. So, yeah, just new ideas. I just love ideas. Yeah, all day long.
I would, yeah, I would imagine that like when you're traveling to
Mm,
like Japan or Australia or some of these places, I would imagine that as you're exploring exploring the various plants, that you probably get into a lot of the culture and
mm,
the history
mm.
that is there. Well, how did this particular plant come to
Oh,
be
yeah,
a
totally.
favored
Yeah.
plant in this particular location?
And it's so fascinating. Or maybe, a similar plant that is then in another location, and you're like, well, it's not really wild here. Why is it here? How was it then introduced? And sometimes, like being here in Japan, it is really fascinating because a lot of the wildflowers are actually plants that we prize in the Western world. So, like miscanthus,
Mm.
this lovely decorative grass, it just grows wild here, everywhere. It just blows my mind. And obviously, bamboo is just growing wild. This is a plant that we would
Yes.
choose to grow in UK, or ligularia, plant with the big round leaves, just grows wild, but we would choose to grow that. So it's just amazing. Like I'm always so fascinated by origins of not just plants, but things, people as well. So it's kind of, yeah, I've got the ideal job, I guess.
Yeah. I haven't traveled to Japan, but I'm come to understand that moss gardening
Mm.
is very important
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And I always think that's kind of funny because here in Washington, anyway, moss is so often viewed as a pest
Yeah.
or something to be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, if they're trying to maintain a nice green lawn and they get moss, they just lose their minds over that. And I think that's kind of
I think
funny.
really there's a phrase in Japan like called wabu sabi, and this is really when you allow nature to shape something that's man-made. So kind of then, maybe you have got an old gate that's got a little bit of rust on it, or maybe there is moss between a
Yeah.
crack in the paving, and like that is kind of wabu sabi look, and that is, yeah, maybe a trend that we could all embrace in the West because it allows more space for nature. It allows us to relax a
Hmm.
bit about not having this pristine garden all the time as well. So, yeah, it's really funny. But there's in every culture there are things that they probably think that we do that are crazy, and vice versa. So, yeah.
I'm sure. Well, how do you think plants and gardening affect our relationship to the natural world?
Mm. I think that really, I think it's changing because I feel like plants almost reached the mainstream in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. And I think this kind of almost like dovetailed with more of a focus on mental health and kind of like well-being. And so I think
Mhm.
people are really noticing like the difference they feel when they're spending time in nature. And it's almost being prescribed in some little corners as well. And I feel like the word has caught on now that nature is good for you, and that can only be a good thing. And it's just going to be getting deeper and deeper, really. So and by what in
Right.
the work that I do, being an ambassador for plants and showing what's possible, hopefully I'm helping that along the way as well.
With Cascade, we we do a lot of gardening classes,
Mm,
some at our local nurseries, just to promote gardening and how nice it is, but also to help people to understand how they can have a
mm,
beautiful garden and not use excessive amounts of water. And we've done that for a number of years. And I'm just noticing this year, it used to be the demographics were
mhm,
such that it was about 90% women,
mhm,
which is great. But I'm noticing just this year that that's starting to shift, and
mhm.
we're starting to see many more men attending these classes, and also younger
Yeah.
people coming into them as well. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift there.
Well, even though it's a bit cheesy to even think down that route, it's kind of like plants are no, they're kind of maybe seen as a little bit cool now. And when something's seen as cool, this is obviously a good thing. But yeah, it's really
Absolutely.
the tide has turned a little bit on it all for sure.
Well, speaking of changing tides, what are the major trends that you're seeing within the garden world in the UK and other places that you travel?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the trends in quite a few countries has been houseplants. And even though that doesn't feel immediately relevant to the type of work that we primarily do, really, I think that's a great gateway to people interacting with plants, spending time with plants, getting used to growing them as well. And very often, even if they haven't got an outdoor space, this could hopefully gravitate to window boxes, for example. But definitely houseplants
Hmm.
has really kind of opened a lot of doors and it was getting popular on social media. We've got so much to thank social media for. And it wasn't really it was starting before the pandemic, but even kind of like post pandemic is really kind of like still, uplifting with houseplants. And so I want to see that kind of gravitate outdoors a little bit. I think with people's gardens outdoors, people are really, again, social media is such a platform for sharing and kind of influencing. And we're showing different ways to garden. It's not all, not every garden has to look the same. Gardens also need to be future proof as well. So people are obviously looking more towards drought tolerant plants, perennials, probably moving more towards perennials than annuals for a kind of sustainability and longevity kind of angle as well. Um, but I think there's a lot of different trends. People are really expressing themselves in their gardens as well. And because many years ago, I
Hmm.
felt like they were trying to make every garden look like really neat cottage garden. But now we're seeing people's personalities in their outdoor spaces, and this is just wonderful as well. And of course, a focus on pollinators, wildlife. I think generally not being too tidy as well. And in not being too tidy, that could also include, not having a lawn or letting a lawn grow a lot longer
Hmm.
and kind of like, you know,
Hmm.
allowing a garden to be 50% for you and 50% for nature. That's probably the best ratio, I would say.
Excellent. Okay. We are at Cascade. We're looking at developing additional resources and ways to help people remove their traditional lawn in favor of
Okay.
other
Mm,
kinds of
yeah.
plants. And it's for us, it's primarily a water conservation
Mhm.
strategy, but I know it gets into a lot
Yeah,
more
yeah.
than just that. Well, so in your travels, are you seeing places that are drought stressed or being affected by climate change such that it's affecting how people are gardening and the plants that they choose?
Yeah, I mean, you would hear those conversations in many places. Like, for example, here in Tokyo, like the city gets very hot in the summer, and it's in pockets it's green, but it's not necessarily the most naturally green city. So there's kind of a real focus on greening that up here and there, and you're seeing a lot of greening up projects in cities all around the world. But also, kind of on a home gardener level, people are then choosing different plants that they're then growing on their balconies or in their gardens, and certainly in the UK, there was a brilliant flood resilient garden at Chelsea Flower Show this year, and this was really educating people in many different ways. So it was kind of really talking about the with floods are obviously very unpredictable. So you need a range of plants that are going to be okay with boggy conditions, but also might be dry for long periods. It was talking about planting on slopes. It was talking about how to collect water as well, but in maybe a more decorative way than you might have in the past, like rain gardens. So this was
Mhm.
really educational. I think it came just at the right time too. So yeah, I'm seeing kind of the conversation is in most spots really, the kind of more unpredictability of weather as well.
Well, what are some of your recommendations for gardeners to conserve water in their gardens?
Yeah, so obviously using water butts, which is something that I was using when I was a kid, but people tend to think they're quite industrial. But there's so many nice new designs. There's a really lovely product in UK called a rainwater terrace, which is almost like a butt that kind of has planting pockets along the way, which is a really lovely way to
Okay.
conserve water, but also have something very, very decorative at the same time. So yeah, I think people need to get used to storing in this way, but also I know when I went around some gardens is Minneapolis last year, the water collecting chains as well, where the water kind
Yes.
of trickles down, which I
Hmm.
think is something you guys have been using for a long time. But this is
Yep.
this is new to us in the UK, and it looks so artistic, but it's also quite utility. And I think because people do want their gardens to look nice, and I think you're more likely to convince someone to do something for good if it looks pretty, if you know what I mean. Which is yeah,
Yes. Yes.
sounds cheesy and like that it would be better if it wasn't that way. But yeah, that is part of how people
Well,
think.
there's a
Yeah,
sure. There's a practical dimension to
yeah,
everything.
100%.
And just for clarification, when you say water butt, that's the word,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. Maybe you have a different word.
We would call that, I believe, a rain barrel here.
Okay, yeah, 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 yeah. I remember when many years ago I was presenting in US on HSN for a couple years down in Florida, and the different words. So I was like, compost is like got to switch that up for dirt, and then you got to use the word container because I was using the word pot all the time.
Yes. Okay.
Like, my
Okay.
translation's
Sure.
good. Yeah.
Well, I know what a Mac and a lorry are, so it's good to have that cross cultural
Cool.
exchange there. Water butt, I'll remember that.
Yeah,
Well, what kinds of projects are you working on now, and what are your plans for the future?
yeah. Well, I'm just in Japan at the moment. I've been working with an English garden here for gosh, maybe about 6 or 7 years. We do workshops and demos. It's actually an English garden that was set up about, I think, in 1991, which is, yeah, it's kind of when you walk into it, it's like, whoa, where am I? Because it really is in the English style. It's really, really incredible. So yeah, I really love having this project with them. I was also recently in the UK at Glee, Birmingham. We were showcasing 50 new, different, and unusual plants in a future plants display. So that was pretty good because that obviously included a few trends, a few more drought tolerant plants here and there. So that was fun. I do a lot of creating content. So I'll be creating some content with a French company called Morel in the next few weeks on cyclamen. Then some Dutch trade shows are coming up in November. Kind of there's always something, and you never know what's coming next. And I love that, because I use social media as this showcase, and I always show the different facets of my job and different things that I do, and that is how people then, feel inspired that they can come to you with like something new that they want you to embrace. And yeah, and I feel like I'm a good connector between the industry and the consumer, which I mentioned earlier as well.
Excellent. Well, do you think we'll see you at the Northwest Flower and Garden Festival next February?
I'm not sure yet, actually. With those things, I never necessarily expect to kind of go to those things every year. And indeed, sometimes you need, I'm traveling a lot at the moment, so I'm kind of like sometimes you need to pace yourself as well, and that's something I really, really kind of learned in the last 6 months. So yeah, if I'm invited, I would love to, but it might be maybe something I roll along to every 2-3 years or so. But yeah, it was such
Okay.
a cool event as well, and to see horticulture in a different way and kind of from honestly, I have to say, in the US, you have so much learning potential. The seminars are really streets apart from anything you would get in UK. Really phenomenal. So really, hats off to you guys for those. And the quality of the show as well. And the plant companies were really interesting and quite a focus on houseplants and some really cool things in there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And the final question for you, what do you most enjoy about your job?
Oh, everything. I don't know. What do I not enjoy?
Well, maybe it's easier to ask what do you not enjoy about your job because it sounds pretty
Yeah,
fun.
I don't know.
I,
I do what feels right. I follow my instincts. I like to do a nice job. I like to be reliable. I like to be a nice guy. And what a lot of people don't realize is when you're a nice person, it actually feels nice as well. So yeah, I just like to be fun, easy to work with, flexible, dedicated, and just always throw myself into new ideas and always say yes as well. A lot of people get very scared about
Mhm.
saying yes to new projects or kind of something that might be out of their comfort zone. Well, how are you ever going to move your comfort zone if you're always in it? So, yeah, is that
Well, i- in my in my spare time, I do a bit of rock climbing,
wow.
and in the rock climbing universe, there's a type of person who's known as a dirt bag climber,
Oh,
and that is an individual who has sort of thrown off the shackles of our modern traditional living, where you have a job and you work real
yeah.
hard at it and you get away, for a few hours
Wow.
when you can. No, you just dedicate yourself to the sport, rock climbing, that you
Uh-huh.
love. And you have an old vehicle and you just travel around, the country or different
Mhm.
places. And you don't worry so much about money or how you're going to survive. You,
Huh.
you just keep going and
Okay.
enjoy life. Anyway, I just mentioned that because as you're describing the work you do and your career and so forth, it reminds me a little bit of a dirtbag climber. So maybe a new term, a dirtbag gardener, which actually seems to work on multiple
Okay,
levels, you
cool.
know?
I love it.
Well, it all sounds great to me.
Cool.
Congratulations on your success and everything you're doing. I know your work is appreciated
Thank
by many people,
you.
and I've certainly enjoyed talking to you today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me as well. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. And if you did, please like and subscribe and follow us on the socials at We Need H2O. You can also find helpful information about Cascade's water conservation programs at cascadewater.org. Have a great day, and remember, we need water.